Do Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for tuning in to this episode of Just Another Tinfoil Hat, copyrighted on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. I'm your host, Zelia Edgar. The aim of this show is to discuss all aspects of the paranormal, from the relatively mainstream to the downright bizarre, to pose questions and entertain ideas regarding every aspect of the unexplained. So, hang on to your tinfoil hats, keep your hands and feet inside the saucer, and please, enjoy the ride. Tonight, I'm really excited to announce our guest. Steve Ward has been fascinated by the unexplained for over half a century. There were two major events that inspired his interest in the unexplained. Growing up in Michigan, the March 1966 UFO flap occurred virtually in his backyard, and the following November, a winged humanoid chased two couples down a lonely country road near Point Pleasant, West Virginia. The legend of the Mothman was born. Steve would be chasing the Mothman the rest of his life. Influenced primarily by John Keel and Jacques Vallée, his views on UFOs became unconventional and moved more toward a more paranormal explanation. Steve's main area of research is what some call high strangeness, or window areas, as Keel dubbed them, where disparate types of paranormal phenomena all seem to occur in the same location, and he believes that studying these paranormally active locations may be the key to understanding what the origin behind these manifestations are. He has his own podcast on this same network called The High Strangeness Factor, and is also co-authoring a book which will be called Parallels and Patterns, a new paradigm for the study of paranormal phenomena. Well, hi, Steve. Thank you so much for joining me tonight.
Well, Zelia, thank you for having me on this, your first show, your maiden voyage. It's a really honor and a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm excited to be starting this podcast as well. This is really super cool.
Yes, and when you and I met at the Van Meter Visitor Festival this past year. I guess you were there the year before. And for those that don't know, what I'm talking about is the Van Meter Festival is a reoccurring event at the end of every September to commemorate the strange sightings, the claims. People said that they saw this strange winged creature in 1903 in Van Meter, Iowa, which is just west of Des Moines. And the three guys that wrote the book investigating this, Chad Lewis, Kevin Nelson, Noah Voss, they're the ones that they're kind of instrumental in getting this going. But my point is that you and we spoke there this past year,
Yeah.
and I have to tell you that of course you and I have done shows together, and we're big fans of people like John Keel and Jacques Vallée and so forth. And as you were speaking, I didn't know anything about you except that you were a member of Wisconsin MUFON,
Mhm.
and you were the director and an investigator for a while. But then as you started talking, I thought, boy, this lady sounds like she's read John Keel. And then you started talking about the super spectrum, and I thought, which of course is John Keel's, I guess, sort of a literary device to try and explain the strange energies behind all this. And then you started talking about some of his books, like UFOs, Operation Trojan Horse, and how what a major influence it was on you. And that about when I was about your age, I'm sounding like a really old guy now, but I was about your age. That same book about the same time really changed my whole paradigm. So it's very cool to find someone that very young in the field, kind of following the same path.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and it's hilarious too because I was thinking pretty much the same thing. Because yes, I was at the Van Meter Festival last year as well, and I got in late to your talk, but I was listening to part of it. I was like, wow, this guy sounds like he really likes John Keel. It sounds like he's read some of his stuff. So I was thinking pretty much the exact same thing listening to your talk too, and how cool it was. Because yes, I'm definitely a major fan of John Keel and that whole kind of school of thought on the paranormal of evidence for possible patterns between each of the different fields. But so while we're on the topic, I was wondering how exactly did you become involved with or interested in the paranormal? Because I know you say that you've had like pretty much a lifelong interest in all things unexplained.
Yeah, for me, now I know from some of our past conversations that
Hmm.
you had experiences when you were young. You had various, I guess, sensitivities and so forth. Uh, my wife had the same kind of thing, and there's so many people that are involved in this that got pulled into it because they've had either seen strange object in the sky, maybe seen a cryptid, or had some significant experience, and it kind of so for some of them, it's a lifelong quest to try and understand what they experienced. For me, I mean, I've had a couple of minor things, I guess, have happened, but never as a kid. And I think it was, I was always interested in science fiction, that kind of thing. So the idea that when I started hearing about flying saucers and UFOs, the idea that they could possibly be real, and that's kind of what pulled me in. I think the first time I ever heard, how if you listen to John Keel, of course, John Keel, the author of the Mothman Prophecies, and the guy that we'll probably be talking a lot about tonight. Uh, a lot of people will pronounce UFO UFO just as like a word. And the first time I heard that was on a oh god, this is very retro. I don't know if you've ever seen Rough and Ready cartoons from the old days. It was a dog and a cat, Hanna Barbera. Wait, anyway, they said so there was a line in there that's talking about, "Hey, Ruff, is that a UFO?" And
Oh my
what
gosh.
the plot was they were captured by the Muli Mula Men, which is aluminum spelled backwards. So I think that's the first time I ever heard UFO. But then a buddy of mine, uh, there was another old TV show called You Asked for It, and I didn't even see it, but they apparently they ran some footage of used to be a famous, I think maybe 16 millimeter capture of some strange lights during the day in Utah, if I remember correctly. Kind of bright lights, and people said, "Oh no, it's just light reflecting off the seagulls." But the idea that these UFOs could be real, that's what you know kind of sparked my interest. And then reading the books of Frank Edwards, who wrote these great anthologies, Stranger Than Science, Strangest
Mhm.
of All, where that's the first time I read about the Flatwoods Monster, the Kelly Hopkins Little Goblins, uh,
Yeah.
the uh, the Aztec UFO crash. So it was that kind of thing that got me started.
Wow, and so then you just kind of carried that interest on, like, throughout your entire life. I know you have an amazing collection of, articles and magazines and books from kind of the golden age of ufology. So,
Right.
yes.
I was there was of course in the 60s they were printing stuff, but the 70s seemed to be a really in the 60s is when the Betty and Barney Hill uh, abduction became known. I mean, it occurred in the early 60s, but by the time they sought out help from Dr. Benjamin Simon, I think it was probably around, I guess it was probably around 66 or so. It was March 66 where we had this huge UFO flap in Michigan. And that was there was like Hillsdale, Dexter,
Mhm.
Ann Arbor, and these are just a stone's throw from where I lived. Now, I was in junior high at the time, so I couldn't I didn't have any wheels to do my UFO investigator gig. So,
Yeah.
but still, there was a lot of very credible people, police officers and so forth, that were saying these things. The Not too far from where I live now, the Frank Manor Farm is where one of these things seems to have touched down. So, and then I had the obligatory high school UFO club. There were four of us, and it was the Aerial Phenomena Investigation and Research Center. See, we thought flying saucer was definitely too passe, and we didn't
Yeah.
want to just use UFO. So, we it was aerial phenomena. We thought we were pretty clever. We Originally it was the Aerial Phenomena Research and Investigation Center, but if you sound out that word, not
Yeah.
very flattering. So we changed the letters around.
Oh, geez, no kidding. Boy. Well, that's really neat, like, and then too, just to imagine, like, because I don't know, not much happens. I'm from the middle of nowhere, Wisconsin, and, well, Wisconsin does have a lot of really standout paranormal cases. Nothing happens in my town for some crazy reason. Um, but just to imagine, like, being there kind of at the center of all that action or very close nearby is just really, really neat.
But
And
but then let me just add a little thing. it was actually a few months later, the following November, was one of the first big major sightings of the Mothman, even before they had dubbed this thing the Mothman, this winged humanoid with red glowing eyes near Point Pleasant, West Virginia, supposedly chased two couples down Route 62. This thing hit the wire services and went all over the world. And I thought, man, how cool is that? And over time, of course, you when you're a kid, you hit the local library way before the internet or anything like that.
Oh, yeah.
And I grabbed every single book I could possibly find on UFOs, and there were some classics there, along with some of the old contact books. But so that was kind of the beginning. And I wanted to mention one other thing. Uh, I don't know if you've ever been introduced to the old anthologies. I think they've been out of print for a long time. Of Frank Edwards. Uh,
Mm.
the first time I encountered any stories about Bigfoot, and I don't know if he called it Bigfoot. He might have used the term Sasquatch. There's actually a chapter in one of his books called "The Monster Apes of Oregon."
Oh, wow.
So that's just really dealt with some of the classic sightings of the Bigfoot in the
Yeah.
Northwest.
Man, that's really neat. So, when you first started up your interest in UFOs and the paranormal, was it kind of across the board, or was it really just, like, mainly UFOs?
It was definitely it was definitely mainly UFOs. I'll have to confess here. I used to now, of course, Fate magazine is still. I don't know if you can get it on the stands anymore. You can get it by subscription, certainly. But it used to be readily available in the stands. This great little digest magazine filled with all kinds of uh, unexplained events, and I had absolutely no patience for anything other than UFOs. I would buy the magazine, I would cut out the UFO article, take the front cover and back cover, and put them together, staple them together, and throw the rest in the wastebasket.
Oh my
Okay,
gosh,
I know.
sacrilege. What the heck?
Absolutely, but I have long since reformed and recaptured many of those old Fate magazines that I would have trashed. So the point is, I thought ghosts were nonsense. I thought UFOs were the fascinating thing. They were probably representative of visitors from other planets, and I guess once in a while there was something in there about a cryptid or whatever before we were really calling them cryptids. This is my era was the I guess it was the '60s when I was started buying these, and then into the '70s. But so yeah, that was really my attitude. And then, and we just mentioned Trojan horse, which
Mhm.
is actually it was came out a little bit before a year or so, or maybe a couple of years before the Mothman prophecies, which kind of people look at as John Keel's magnum opus, but it really isn't. It's really Trojan horse because that's where uh, he started to well, like he was now John Keel was influenced by Charles Fort, and Charles Fort wrote the Book of the Damned, Low, More Strange Events. He called articles from all uh, from scientific journals and from newspapers, all kinds of bizarre events that like strange lights in the sky, falls of fish out of the sky, just bizarre events. And the term Fortean came from that. Well, John Keel considered himself a Fortean. And Charles Fort said, "You begin to measure a circle anywhere." Well, he was had a heavy influence on John Keel because Keel originally thought, like I think we all did,
Mhm.
that these things were primarily extraterrestrial and
Oh,
coming
yeah.
from other planets. And so it was Trojan horse that where he kind of hinted at it a little bit earlier when he wrote "Strange Creatures from Time and Space," which I should let people know is also the guide to imaginary no, the guide to mysterious
Yep,
beings. I think that's right.
The Complete Guide to Mysterious Beings, yep.
Okay, yes,
Yep.
okay. And that's where he starts talking about window areas, and he's trying to, he's sort of hinting at trying to come to grips with, why in these particular areas do all these bizarre events seem to come together? UFOs, cryptids, poltergeist phenomena. So, and the last thing I'll say about it is that when I remember that my buddy Rick, who now Rick was he was in the original high school UFO club, and then we had another sort of an informal UFO group, but actually had a few professional people in it. Now, I wasn't one of the professional types. I think I was between jobs at the time, but you have to have one of those guys in your group. But we heard about Trojan Horse, and I had followed Keel a little bit and knew about him. And we heard about this, and we thought we were actually bad mouthing it. We thought, oh, what's Keel talking about? How could this, it kind of destroyed the whole wonderful paradigm of the the space brothers or the invaders or whatever coming to Earth to examine us and take soil samples and so forth. So it was yeah, I kind of came kicking and screaming a little bit before I accepted it. But so that was kind of the I mean, we all have our kind of evolution, our progression in this, and so Keel became a really major effect on my thinking.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Well, I know when I started, it was mainly cryptids. That was my thing. I was obsessed with anything cryptozoology related. And, then moving on, I kind of garnered an interest in ghosts. And then finally, UFOs were kind of a latecomer. And in my way of thinking, up until reading the Mothman prophecies, everything was, separate. Like, yes, we have all these unexplainable accounts, but they belong, strictly to UFOs are extraterrestrial related, cryptids are just undiscovered creatures, ghosts are, spirits of the deceased or whatever. And yeah, to go then to, Keel's concept that, well, why then are there these patterns which emerge between these different fields of study was just a complete just revelation to me. So, and one that I know
But
you're very interested in, obviously.
once it's like you uh, I don't know. I guess it's like jumping into an ice cold pool or whatever, but after a while you adjust to the temperature, and then all of a sudden it begins to make sense. And then once I accepted that, I was like one of these people that got a new religion, you know,
Yeah.
and
Oh
wanted to
yeah.
pester everybody because you wanted to save their soul. So I
Oh
actually
yeah.
I
Uh,
actually in 1976, I I was able to attend the now uh, I had a Carmen Gia, which is kind of cool because John Keel had a Carmen Gia for a
oh
while.
wow.
And for those that don't know what a Carmen Gia is, it looks kind of like a VW bug, only squashed down a little bit more. But very cool. Except in the wintertime, you couldn't get the damn heater to work.
Oh
But
boy.
uh, but the it's right in my backyard, the Ann Arbor, Michigan, which was an easy drive for me growing up in the Detroit area. And this was 10 years after the swamp gas fiasco, and of course that's when Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who used to be associated with Project Blue Book, was we had those sightings in March of '66, and he suggested that some of them were possibly swamp gas, and then it was everything was swamp gas. But he was there speaking, and his talk was called "Swamp Gas Plus 10 and Counting." And so that was really cool to actually meet Dr. Hynek. There were other Ray Stanford was there, Jerome Clark was there. We had quite a good bunch of people. But what my long-winded thing I'm trying to get to is that I was talking, as you do in the lobbies and so forth. I
Yeah.
actually met Walter Andrus, who was the director of MUFON. He's the one that broke away from, oh, what was it? He left APRO, was it? And formed
Oh,
MUFON.
I
I'm
think
not
that's
sure.
right. That
Okay,
sounds right. Yeah.
but I'm talking to everybody about the paranormal angle,
Yep.
and they're looking at me like I'm a life insurance salesman trying to keep them late till 10:30 at night, trying to sell them a policy when they didn't want anything to do with it. So uh, that was yeah, that was really I was really not welcome with some of the people.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it is funny how, because I know that, this concept of, yeah, the unified theory of the paranormal, that these things, not even necessarily all sightings or even all types of sightings, but a good chunk of them may be interrelated. is kind of considered the fringe of the fringe if the paranormal is already kind of on the outskirts of, scientific thinking. This is on the outskirts of that. And it's funny to see people's response to that sometimes.
Well, and the other thing is I find, even today, there's so, if you my contention is if you follow the reports, the things that people have said they experience, you you run into certain problems. Uh, there are the paranormal angle, the seems to rear its ugly head every once in a while. And well, for example, with cryptids, you get rational people talking about their experience. They're seeing the same thing, sometimes even in near a heavy populated area, and there's even footprints left and so forth. But then you know that you can't, nobody can find it. It's gone. uh, Something happened. People really saw something, but then where does it go? Where did it come from? Some sightings of UFOs. Apparently a metallic ship or whatever changes shape, or it disappears, or it just there's just so many aspects that don't fit a nice either neat nuts and bolts or flesh and blood uh, you know uh, paradigm for these things. So again, if you but, okay, let's just take for an example the infamous Skinwalker Ranch. That's
Mm, yep.
the used to be the, what was the owner, became
Oh,
the Bradshaw, no, not the Bradshaw Ranch, the Bigelow Ranch.
oh, yep.
Bigelow was the billionaire that, set up the scientific team, the NIDS team, to investigate it. It was Sherman, the Sherman Ranch. Uh, all kinds of bizarre things happening there. Like in my intro, you talked about these high strangeness areas. Well, Point Pleasant, West Virginia was one. The Skinwalker Ranch is one. The Bradshaw Ranch, and on and on. If you on the Skinwalker Ranch, for example, which you can find out a lot, there's several books out. But if you go to Hunt for the Skinwalker by George Knapp, who is an investigative reporter in Las Vegas, and Colin Kelleher, who was one of the scientists from the National Institute for Discovery Science that did the investigations there. Uh, if you isolate certain parts, you think, well, this is ET or maybe perhaps entities from another dimension. But if you look at the broad spectrum, they were hearing disembodied voices. They were experiencing things like poltergeist phenomena in displaced objects, uh, bizarre, just animal mutilations that didn't make any sense right behind their backs. So it's again, when you look at the reports, if you don't ignore certain things, don't isolate certain things, something else emerges that is very hard to explain and sometimes kind of disturbing. It's we all want to. There's something in us that wants to seek answers and understand what's going on. But when these things don't fit into neat little categories, then it becomes very frustrating sometimes.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And the interesting thing too that I've noticed, especially like kind of looking at older material, is kind of the trends that these things go through, and specifically as it pertains to UFO sightings. And I just even noticed that in Messengers of Deception, he was even talking about Jacques Vallée was discussing how no one really wanted to see the pattern between animal mutilations and UFO sightings. And now today, for me, growing up and learning this stuff in the early 2000s, cattle mutilations are always explained away as aliens, but it's funny how that concept really was kind of groundbreaking at the time, or even the flying boxcars in Sweden in the late 40s. No one was suggesting that these were extraterrestrial in nature. Everyone was concerned about the holdover of World War II. So there are definitely, I would say, patterns that kind of trends that come and go and explanations for this. But the question is, like, do any of these trends, are they the actual explanation or are they just our current model of belief?
Yeah, that's a big factor. Yeah, there's a couple things. You mentioned how first, before I talk about how uh, these patterns change over the decades, uh, my contention is that if we especially if we go back several decades. And John Keel one time said that this is back in the maybe 70s. He said that if we could somehow put together all the information that is known that people have in their files and so forth, that we might actually have the answer if we could somehow, put all this material together. But it's spread everywhere. The other thing is that I think that my big thing is looking at parallels and patterns that show up in all these different things, and it's if we go back in time before the internet, before this glut of paranormal reality shows,
Yeah.
before uh, before all this stuff, and I mean, there was some information out there. We had certain magazines on the stand, and once in a blue moon, you'd get a special on one of the networks. But there was much less chance of people getting together to promote a hoax where it would where the pattern would be the same. You know what I mean? Where
Oh,
people were
yeah.
talking about exactly the same thing, but it's sort of like the weird case of Joe Symington in
Yeah.
Eagle River, Wisconsin. He talks about the aliens wanted water in a bucket. Well, 10 years before that, you had a couple of miners in California that supposedly saw a little guy out of a craft scoop up water and take it into his spaceship or whatever it was. So so that's important. But then you mentioned the other thing is that things haven't changed, stay the same. Like for example, the entities and the the uh, the so-called occupants that people have always associated with the craft. Before we started talking about abductions, there were a lot of landing cases where people would start to see some kind of a creature or entity, maybe in a some kind of a spacesuit looking thing or not. And this is what Dr. Hynek years ago he wrote. A book called The UFO Experience. And that's where he first, we take them for granted now, but that's where he first introduced the close encounter categories. Uh, Close encounters of the first kind is a close sighting of a UFO. Second kind has to do with some kind of an unexplained craft leaving some kind of physical evidence, landing marks, burn marks, or what have you. And then close encounters of the third kind, where someone would see an entity, perhaps through a porthole or maybe disembarking from one of these craft. And the uh, uh, the thing is that the way these beings or whatever looked have changed over time. Now, you just wrote an article for Brett Rains in his online magazine, Alternate Perceptions, about the clothing that that they are seen with these entities,
Oh, yeah.
and you notice that that there were certain patterns, and you wonder about the whole reality of the experience when you start getting into the what these beings were wearing.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, the article in question was Knit Caps and Coveralls, the Problem of UFO Occupant Clothing. And it all kind of the idea came to me when I was actually researching the Flatwoods Monster and its, very robotic sort of appearance. And of course, the Flatwoods Monster was spotted in conjunction with an apparently downed craft. And what really bothers me about that is the fact that that's exactly what we should be expecting if UFOs are either piloted by or sent by extraterrestrial biological entities, we should really be expecting, either full-fledged hazmat suits or robotic drones of some sort, because of course, any biological entity coming here from some other planet theoretically should not be able to survive our atmosphere. And, even if they somehow have a very similar biology, they just wouldn't want to take that risk, of coming to literally an alien planet that's full of contagions that they couldn't understand, from that far away. And so that's kind of what spurred my interest then in the clothing of UFO occupants. And truthfully, more often than not, it's kind of, Keel and Valet both point out this notion of absurdity in regards to paranormal occurrences. And that's kind of what you find as it pertains to this issue. I know Simon Tin's beings, he actually described as looking like very short Italians. They were wearing two-piece
Yes.
turtleneck suits and little knit caps. And again, that's definitely not what we would be expecting of, a technologically advanced race coming here from some other planet. I would like to remind everyone that you are listening to Just Another Tinfoil Hat, copyrighted on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. I'm your host, Zelia Edgar, and today we are visiting with Steve Ward.
That's something Keel found and that'll go to my next point. Keel talked about how he was getting reports from people that the person in the craft that would maybe step out or that they saw, they would describe them, and not very sophisticated, their description. They would say, well, they look kind of foreign,
Yeah.
dark foreign types. It's sounding a little xenophobic there. Uh, European, whatever. And they couldn't. A lot of times they didn't seem to. Well, Symington's one of the few that said they looked. They were kind of dark and swarthy like Italians, was his words.
Yeah.
So, but this shows up now and then, and some of the another whole can of worms, the Men in Black phenomena. Some of these characters that show up seem to have the same kind of countenance. The Indrid Cold character, I'm not sure if he was real or not, but the Woodrow Derenberger during the Mothman fiasco said he encountered a gentleman that looked like this, and then Keel found this an old press conference with General Spatz. Now, General Spatz apparently was one of the big time generals of World War II, and somewhere in this press conference, and I don't know the context, but he says there's no truth to the rumor that flying saucers are being driven by Spaniards or that they're coming from Spain. So what is going on here? He's telling us that these dark foreign types aren't coming from Spain. So apparently, people were. This is the context and what people were seeing. I mean, and these are from obviously from the U.S. I mean, again,
Hmm.
a little xenophobia there. They're talking about, as one person's foreigner is another person's, native. So, uh, but then you go over a period of time and, people say, well, what about the Greys? Well, it seems like the Greys didn't really show up until about late 70s, early 80s, around the time
Hmm.
Close Encounters of the Third Kind, that the film by Spielberg, came out late 70s. They're kind of like Greys, the big head guys. And then Whitley Strieber with Communion in the 80s, we start seeing more of the Greys. And it's almost like you could hardly ever find a Grey early on,
Yeah.
occasionally. But so what's that all about? You wonder how is this evolution seems to be taking place. So, like you said, uh, is it physical? Is it did the new kids in town come around and kick everybody else out, or are we dealing with something else?
Yeah, because I know the Greys too. I think I mentioned to you off air. It's like they kind of took over from the very classic, like diving suit sort of look that was observed. I think mainly in the late 50s, early 60s. Um, and yeah, and there is always too. It's weird because you'll see, any of these trends kind of sprinkled throughout the older material, but never really in full force. Because I know, of course, there are descriptions of things like Greys throughout fairy lore, not as prominent as the other modes of dress, if that's kind of what or the modes of appearance, I guess I should say, even though I know some people, some contactees and abductees have claimed that they feel as though the Greys are actually the spacesuit, and that the entity is somehow hidden inside.
Or even some kind of an android?
Hmm.
When people talk about the aliens that Betty and Barney Hill encountered in what was it, 61, in New Hampshire. Uh, some people said though they were grays, but they're not really grays. It's almost like if those entities, again, assuming it was a real experience, if those entities had created sort of a caricature of themselves, you'd have a gray. It's not quite them, but it's more simple. It's just like if we make a mannequin or a doll of a human, it can be very like those silly Lego people.
Oh, yeah.
With it. Yes, okay. That's maybe not the best example, but so but there's been a lot of changes throughout the years. It was Ted Phillips. Ted Phillips was a colleague of Dr. Hynek. Phillips literally investigated thousands of of trace landing cases,
Oh,
close
wow.
encounters of the second kind, and where and also where the effects, the physical effects, might be on the individual. Well, he has said that in general, the we used to get all the classic egg-shaped object or the classic saucer shape, but a lot of those have been replaced more by sort of light phenomena, light ball or light anomaly phenomena, rather than a sort of a classic craft.
Yeah, and that's interesting too, because I feel like that body of reports is kind of not taken as to be, I shouldn't say not taken as seriously, but it's not taken to be as important as the so-called like hard and fast craft type objects.
Right. And Keel again, and back to your other point, Keel uh, made a distinction in between, well, especially in books like Trojan Horse and the Mothman Prophecies. He made a distinction between what he called the soft sightings and the hard sightings. The hard sightings were the what appeared to be nuts and bolts craft, uh, uh, with the landing pods and portholes and so forth. And then there was the strange meandering lights. And he began to believe that the real phenomena were the soft sightings, the light phenomena, and he thought that perhaps the oh, I don't know, that, but appear to be the hard sightings might be more of a facade or kind of a deception.
Yeah, I think he mentioned that earlier in let's see, the principle of transmogrification, one of his earlier articles before Trojan Horse was kind of where he
Yes,
propounded that. Um, yeah, I
and
know
it
that.
also. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I know that's also kind of shared in a little bit later works by Valet too. That possibly the really important things actually aren't the you know evidence of technology or technological advancement that the current model of belief really supports.
And also in it seems to me in the Mothman prophecies he talks about like again the idea that the lights, the strange meandering lights, might be the only reality, and that when people are seeing them, they're being programmed to see different things. One person will see a shambling hairy biped cross the road and go off into the woods. Somebody else will see a giant a UFO the size of a football field, but nobody else is seeing it because it's just them seeing it. But he also stressed at times. Now Keel was not static in his thinking. So if you go through there's several anthologies out now where you can see his. There are many articles over the years from probably the 50s, 60s, 70s into the 80s, and he felt that these weren't all hallucinations, though. He That's when he talked about his that the transmogrification of energy,
Mhm.
that perhaps, and that's when he got into the is he used as kind of a, literary device, the ultra terrestrial, and all that really meant was that perhaps these entities, these beings, are not extraterrestrial. They are, in fact, a natural condition of the planet. And he thought that perhaps that some of these things were sort of temporal transmogrifications, paraphysical. They would sort of, eventually, not to put words in his mouth, but they would sort of appear, whether they're coming through a window area or manifesting, and then just sort of, I don't know, dissipate or go elsewhere. And that's why they would become so elusive. And when you look at a lot of the experience and the reports and so forth, it seems like that something along those lines might actually explain at least part of what's going on.
Oh yeah, definitely. There is something interesting that comes up a lot in dealing with people who have, especially like close encounters with anything paranormal. But I see it a lot with UFOs, and it's kind of this belief that they have been like chosen for the sighting or personally conditioned for it. And I thought of that in regards to the light phenomena, how Keel believed that it may have been the only reality to it. What do you think of that? This kind of pretty prominent belief that certain people are either selected or somehow able to attract this sort of phenomenon.
Well, yeah, I think that's. I mean, you look at me. I'm the guy that grounds out all paranormal activity. I think, but there are other people that he talked about people that are naturally attuned to some of these things. they use the term repeaters. He said that somebody that had seen a UFO is very likely to see one again. Also, someone that's seen a UFO or experienced a cryptid is also likely to see other types of paranormal phenomena. It seems that for whatever reason, certain people are tuned in, and it kind of goes to, you wonder what, how real then are these things? But one thing I should say is that there's definitely not one answer to all these things. We're talking about. I would never be definitive and say that none of these things are solid. None of these things are in fact extraterrestrial or some kind of a as Albert Rosales talks about them as the others amongst us. Uh, I have come to believe that I think in some cases we must be dealing with some kind of a other race or some kind of an entity, and but it's just so frustrating because you get caught in this logic loop kind of thing. And you and I both started out as John Keel did, and everybody and many people in this with looking at the ET as the most likely possibility, or if we're looking at cryptids, they're some kind of a flesh and blood unknown that somehow has remained elusive. But then you look at the stranger aspects of, say, the dog man, or you have Bigfoot reports where the proximity of the Bigfoot seems to stall an automobile engine in the same way that
Yeah.
a UFO does. You see them; people have seen them glowing, disappearing, reappearing. But then you get pulled back around because if you focus in one area, it doesn't explain everything, and then you get kind of pulled back around to the other side, so to speak, going from the more ethereal or elusive to something more solid and physical. But then you run it again into, it's like, well, wait a minute, this doesn't work either. So I guess I've come to the conclusion that there must be two major aspects to this. There must be, as Keel talked about, that we must be dealing with. He talked a great deal about the reflective factor and paranormal mimicry, because he would entertain certain notions about what might be behind the phenomenon, and then he would find reports would come to him to support that notion. Uh,
Oh yeah.
so, and it's just sometimes you wonder, why the hell do we even bother? Because it is so confusing and so elusive.
Oh yeah, definitely. Well, and I mean, I think that's the neat thing too about trying, like, the neat but also frustrating thing, like you were saying, in going with this notion that, okay, there are patterns and connections between these different fields, is that every now and again something will show up that doesn't even fit that established pattern then. Which is, it's interesting, but again, it leads you right back to square one kind of.
Yes, a good example. I just said that the Greys were very infrequent in the old days, but if you can actually go back into Swedish folklore, and some of the Swedish elves look kind of like Greys with the big bulbous heads and long arms. Uh, in some cases, if you again, we've mentioned Jacques Vallée. Jacques
Mhm.
Vallée's passport to Magonia.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah.
he made there's so many parallels between elements of folklore, various traditions, and modern day UFO experiences. In some cases, if you take if you took the boiler suit, the coveralls, the whatever, and switched it, took it off, and put a little green tunic on with a little red cap, the entities would look very much the same.
Mhm.
So it's almost like sometimes the fairies, the elementals of old, were the same kind of being as the modern day UFO reports. But then, even if you go back, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, of course, we know him as the creator of Sherlock Holmes, and he wrote a book. He was one of the first paranormal investigators. He wrote a book called The Coming of the Fairies, and in there he talks about how the appearance. Now, he firmly believed in the elementals and that people were seeing them and experiencing them. He said the appearance of the fairies is largely dependent on the individual viewing them, and he even suggested that they might be a thought form. in some cases.
Oh, wow.
So would it have been great if Doyle and Keel would have been able to have a discussion?
Oh my gosh. That would have been actually amazing. Well, I know that concept too, wasn't that kind of what Carl Jung came to the conclusion of, which I didn't realize until recently that I think his last book was on UFOs.
Well, it was, yeah, the UFOs, let's see, a modern myth of things seen in the sky. And he even thought that they were solid somehow. I guess from what I've read, I haven't read his whole book yet. But yeah, he recognized the. Well, he talked about the Mandela, the circle, the sort of I don't know, something. He talked about archetypes, these deep buried uh, uh, concepts that are kind of embedded in the collective unconscious. And of course, he wasn't able to explain the whole realm of UFOs, and I guess he was kind of a pariah for a while. He his colleagues didn't like him looking at this and kind of entertaining it. There was a time when I completely rejected the ET theory, and I would soberly tell somebody that we were dealing with psychic manifestations of a collective human unconscious.
Oh,
All right.
wow. Yeah.
But there's problems with that. Okay. Even if the ideas of we talk about tulpas, these thought forms that people can create, and we have poltergeist phenomena in some cases is the result of an individual, an unconscious release of mental energy. Uh, Still, even if an aspect of UFOs, cryptids, and so forth is a projection of human consciousness, why those certain things? Why those certain archetypes? And in other words, why do we see strange things in the sky and strange creatures wandering in the dark? Why don't we see Professor Dumbledore flying through the air on his broom, or so many other things that are very, very prominent in pop culture? Whatever's going on, it's very selective, even though we'll get, uh, huge varieties of types of craft, types of entity, types of creature. So I guess again, what I'm saying is that there's not one, there isn't a unified theory yet that just explains all of this. So it can be very frustrating.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting too because for as much as this phenomena does tend to be very reflective of us, I feel like it also does in many cases, it appears to have an intelligence of its own and exercises that over us sometimes. As much as we're kind of altering it by our perception of it, it almost kind of alters us as well, kind of in return
Yeah,
or
I think
something.
that that's right. It's a it definitely is a we're sort of, I guess, co-creators
Yeah.
with whatever this is. Uh, here's one thing that I thought, because I would go back and forth, and I couldn't. It was very hard to come to a conclusion. But it seems to me that there is this mechanism that exists in human consciousness that is reflective, that does create this mimicry sometimes, and it can be express itself in religious apparitions, negative apparitions, or whatever. So we definitely, there is a mechanism in which a lot of this could be projections of us, reflections of us, some kind of an interface. But it seems to me that there's some aspects of this that dictate that we must also be dealing with some kind of a other intelligence, and it could be a grand central station of other entities. I mean, when you get into some of the encounters, the classic encounters, and then the uh, uh, Jacques Vallée and Bob Pratt investigated a lot of close encounters and abduction attempts in Brazil
Mm.
in, what was it, the 70s and 80s. Just bizarre stuff where people were grabbed by hooks and so forth and
Oh,
supposedly taken up into the craft. It seems that both are true. You've got a real other intelligence, and maybe several, and you have this aspect of human consciousness that is uh, that creates phantasm sometimes, creates phenomena. What if what if those some of those intelligences were perfectly aware of that mechanism in human consciousness, and then perhaps through a focus of attention or uh, focus of will, maybe technology can manipulate that to sort of mask their activities, to kind of lead us along by the nose sometimes. In other words, uh, I think that perhaps, and this is really me just grasping, but I think perhaps both must be true to some degree to explain what people are experiencing. Does that make any sense at all?
Oh, yeah, definitely, because, I mean,
Okay,
and even with, the thing with, the Brazilian cases that you just mentioned, that harkens right back to, the miraculous airship of, 1897, which was, of course, kind of the first big UFO flap before UFOs were a thing, in the United States. The hook that came down and, it snagged a few people. Can't remember if that was in Ohio or what, and then there was the instance of the cow that reportedly was taken up into the airship as well. And this
right.
brings up the really funny issue of, yes, there is actual, like, physical trace evidence. So, in going with this notion then of, projections by some sort of other intelligence, there is still a physical side to things.
Yes, and it could be as I early on I thought that it was that the same kind of thing that where a poltergeist caused by an individual, if that was turned into some people seem to be able to create flashes of light, start fires, move objects, and so forth. Well, what could the mass mind do? Maybe the mass mind can occasionally create an airship or a UFO or an entity or a monster, but it doesn't. It can't explain everything. I don't think. Um, but yeah, there's a real physical side to it, and you wonder if we do make the leap and we say that yes, there are uh, other intelligences that are aware of this mechanism, and maybe some of them aren't and don't really care and go about their own business. Uh, it's still to me both seem to have to be part of the whole puzzle picture in order to explain everything. I mean, we've got Ivan Sanderson talking about how metallic craft have been seen coming in and out of the oceans and so forth.
Mhm.
I doubt. I just can't believe everything is a transmogrification or a psychic projection or a hallucination.
Yeah, definitely. I think there must just be more than, obviously more than one answer to this big question of what is all of this stuff.
We have we have gone over. I hope the listening audience out there hasn't blown their vacuum tubes because we really have taken a strange path here tonight.
Yeah, there's just so much in regards to this phenomenon, the paranormal in general, and even just the field of UFOs. It just ties into so very much stuff. But yeah, it looks like our hour here is almost up. So again, thank you so much for agreeing to be on my show, Steve. This was really amazing. Is there anything you'd like to let everyone know about what you have coming up?
Uh, Listen, I really appreciate you asking me to be on your first show. I'm really thrilled to be here. Let's see, I've got well, I'm allegedly writing a book, which will be be a while before it's out. Of course, I have the high strangeness factor, which is on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. I'm also going to be heard on Mac Maloney's Military X Files every week uh, um, as a correspondent, and that's you can also get those on the same network. And I think that's about it. We'll have some speaking engagements coming up in spring and summer, but that's a ways away. In fact, you've got one coming up in at Butler, the Butler Paranormal Weekend in Butler is near Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and so that'll be a lot of fun.
Oh yeah,
Great group of people there.
I am really, really excited about that. So it should be a really cool time.
But I really appreciate you asking me to come on board, and I Just send those cards and letters, and tell us how confused we made you tonight.
Yes, please do. But anyway, thank you again so much. This was just really, really neat. So, once again, I would like to thank my guest, Steve Ward, and you can catch him on the High Strangeness Factor on this same network, new episodes alternate Tuesdays, as well as a whole host of amazing episodes in the Podbean archives. I would also like to thank Irene Ellen Block and Mark Johnson, the people in charge here at the Paranormal UK Radio Network. And a thank you, too, to John Hutchinson for composing my intro and outro music. With all that said, if you enjoyed this program, you can catch new episodes every other Monday on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. And go ahead and check out my YouTube channel, also called Just Another Tinfoil Hat. Again, this has been Just Another Tinfoil Hat, copyrighted on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. And I am Zelia Edgar, signing off.